exitosa en función de la construcción de negocios tecnológicos. Para darles una reseña bien breve, porque creo que Chris va a contar su propia historia, lo más significativo de toda su trayectoria, Chris creó la empresa ISS hace ya algunos años, por allá por la década del 90, y en el año 2006 la vendió a IBM en $1.300 millones, siendo un evento bastante disruptivo en lo que era en ese entonces todo el ecosistema de innovación tecnológica del estado de Georgia y yo diría de todo el sureste de Estados Unidos. Hoy contamos con la presencia de Chris, lo que nos tiene muy contentos en función de un programa que hemos venido trabajando con él y con su equipo, que tiene que ver con justamente la posibilidad para nuestros estudiantes en la Facultad de Ingeniería de construir emprendimientos tecnológicos y de construir emprendimientos tecnológicos que sean financiados por él, en porcentajes, bueno, que acordarán los emprendedores con él. Y lo que ha significado que varios de nuestros estudiantes, y veo que hay algunos que están aquí, han estado trabajando por varios meses en generar emprendimientos tecnológicos más atractivos, más afinados, con mejores pitch de venta y comercialización. Así es que, sin más, lo voy a dejar con Chris Klaus. Chris es exalumno de UdeC, eso tengo que decirlo, ¿no? ¿Ah? Y hoy día, y con esto cierro, Chris, bueno, y Jennifer, que también nos acompaña, el equipo de Chris, están trabajando con la Universidad de Concepción en este programa y en paralelo, en el mismo tipo de programa, están trabajando con la University of North Carolina State University y Duke University. ¿Qué es lo que quiere decir eso? Que al mismo tiempo que ellos están trabajando con las universidades Research Triangle, que quizás es uno de los sistemas de innovación más activos de Estados Unidos junto a Silicon Valley, están trabajando con nosotros. Así es que eso es un gran honor, una gran responsabilidad, y a todos los chicos, estudiantes que están aquí, de las distintas carreras, les digo, entusiásmense, inspírense al escuchar la historia de Chris, y también aprovechen las oportunidades que tienen aquí en la facultad. Son únicas, muy específicas. Quienes sean beneficiados con este programa van a lograr alcanzar ecosistemas globales, como yo les contaba recién, con el impacto y el alcance que están teniendo Chris y su equipo en función de la construcción de programas de emprendimiento a nivel global. Así que siéntanse parte de un desafío internacional, van a ser muy exitosos, como siempre decimos en clases. Los estudiantes de Ingeniería de la Universidad de Concepción están capacitados para hacer grandes cosas, solo hay que creerse un poco el tema y confiar en que las cosas van a resultar bien. So Chris, first, thank you very much for being with us today. I know it's been a long trip. I know Concepción is far from Atlanta, so we really appreciate that you take your time to be here with us and also to work with our students in inspiring them for new challenges regarding entrepreneurship and helping us as a country to build those new technology-based industries that we need. So the floor is yours, Chris. Thank you very much.
You want me to, I guess. Buenos dias. Oh, perfect. Okay. Yeah, so I can talk to you a little bit about my background, if that makes sense, and then I'd love to open up the floor for questions. But one of the things you guys for invited to talk about startups. So when I was a college student, like many of you in this room, I got excited about working on a technology problem around cybersecurity. And I think when I was a freshman, I had built some software to help find vulnerabilities. And I had no intention of doing a startup. But as a freshman, I had somebody who asked me the question of, you know, have you thought about doing a startup? And I started looking into it. And from there, that one question kind of changed the trajectory of my life in terms of not just working on an interesting problem, but how do you solve it and scale the solution? And very fortunately, was able to connect with other people either through my university or through the business community, and quickly connected with a lot of mentors and entrepreneurs to help me go from idea to setting up the company to growing a business. And that business, fortunately, was succeeded in that we were able to ultimately take it public. And I'd say in the early days, like my first customer, large customer, was Department of Energy. I'd actually found that they had a lot of vulnerabilities. This is back in the early 90s, where every computer on the internet was very vulnerable. And so talking to them, I didn't know much about business other than I'd built some software, and one of the admins there wanted to buy the software, and early on had said, do you want, I came up with pricing, basically $50,000 US, and the admin that I was talking to was, hey, I can buy the software for 30,000, and I told them, oh, that's funny, because my pricing just changed to 30,000, and they ended up buying the software right there over the phone. And so that helped me hire both business people, salespeople, and engineers. So the company that I started, Internet Security Systems, we quickly went out and raised like $4 million from the venture capitalist community. And we were able to use that money, and we split it up into two different functions. One function was half the money was spent on engineering to build out the solution. The other half was marketing and sales. And we actually used the $4 million to very quickly set up a headquarters, not just in the US, but also in Europe, was in Brussels, just because a lot of our business seemed to be coming from Europe and Russia and all parts of Europe. And then a year later, we raised another $6 million. And again, we kind of split that money into half of it was going into engineering, half of it was going into marketing and sales. And again, we went even more international. We set up an office in Tokyo, ISS KK, and that covered all of Asia in terms of selling and marketing and support in Asia. So we were able to very quickly go international. It's something I would recommend most of my startups that we're helping to think about, especially with the internet, to go beyond just your normal borders, but can you go global and provide a solution worldwide? With that, the following year, we actually went public on the NASDAQ, which is a public market, and we were able to raise another $50 million to grow the business. And we actually ended up taking the ISS KK, our Asian office, went public as well. So we raised money for expansion into India, Australia, Singapore, et cetera, throughout the world there. Did that for a long time. And one of the things is I wanted to give back to my university. So I highly encourage you guys, as you build your success or career, to think about giving back to the university. And that's kind of one of the things I wanted to do, was give back to the university. And so I gave them some equity in my first company, and that turned into a building. So if you ever come to Atlanta, Georgia, would love to host you at my building. It's a very cool building. Pablo has seen the building. He approves. He says, beautiful building. And so within that, but I talked to a lot of students, and the issue I was running into is a lot of them had lots of really interesting problems and solutions they were coming up with. But I'd always ask, like, why aren't you doing a startup? And I think the same problem that I had is I never thought of it, is what I heard from the students. Oh, how would you do a startup? And so we put together a program to kind of help reach students, to get them to not just think about how to do a startup, but actually give them kind of the roadmap to building their own startup. So they could actually spend the summer working on their startup, get funding for their startup, get access to mentors with their startup, and really start to put in motion the ability of these students to really work on their startup and give them a fair opportunity. And some of the data that I would say is every year we've been scaling it up, and I'd say half of the startups will find out, they learn, I'd say almost all of the startups learn a lot. So as a founder, as a student, you'll learn more in business by trying to do your own startup than you can take in any class, just because it'd be like trying to drive a car. You could read a book all you want, but getting in the car and driving is the only real way to learn. Same thing with a startup. You can read about startups, but you really don't know startups until you try to build one. And I think what we found is even this, if you ask me, how many of the startups fail? Like how many of the startups fail? I would actually say almost all of them. And what we found is the ones that end up succeeding is what they call pivoting. They found out, they go in with a lot of assumptions. Like, oh, if I just build this, everybody's going to buy it. And then they start talking to customers and they realize that one problem in that solution, no one's going to buy. But as they talk to customers, they find out what the real problems are. And they find out where would they really spend money. And then they come back with a solution. So almost every startup that I have seen go through CreateX is the program, almost all of them have pivoted. And some of them have gone from, one was like a fitness app, like working out and stuff. And that same team said, no one wants to use that app. And they pivoted into an online, like a Zoom application that became successful. So very, very different pivoting. I'd say the other startups, even if you don't succeed, and there's a lot of reasons it won't succeed. Maybe you didn't find the right co-founders. Maybe it's the wrong timing. Maybe it's the wrong idea, etc. But ultimately, every one of them comes out with the goal of entrepreneurial confidence. Like, hey, I didn't have a successful startup. I spent 3 months on it. Failure is okay. It's all right. We expect that. Like, you're going to learn from, that's where you learn the most, when you have problems and you find out why it didn't work. But you now have confidence to go, but I did learn how to talk to customers. I learned how to put together a pitch deck. I learned what is equity? How do I share equity with other co-founders? What's the algorithm there? There's a lot of problems in getting a startup going. And a lot of people don't even know what equity is or how to put together a pitch deck. So this allows students to actually experience that. And it's not just a simulation, it can be a real startup. And then from there, we've seen probably at least a third of those startups go on to raise more money. I'd say a high percentage of them, when I say high, at least 10 to 20% actually get some level of success, meaning they get customers, they get some revenue. That is your number one goal, is to get customers and make them happy and build something that they love, so to buy the product. Anyway, so it's growing, and we've seen quite a few startups succeed. And so I'm looking to help partner with you guys to build your startups. Love to provide, I'm building a platform to help kind of be like LinkedIn is for business, but I'm trying to build a network called Fusion for students to connect to other students and other founders to talk about startups and what problems there are and how to succeed and how to connect to mentors, how to connect to funding, how do you go global. Those are all the problems that I think are very exciting to be able to work on, and love to work with you guys on those problems. So I do want to switch over to questions, unless I'll let Pablo be my...
Okay. So, anímense, pregunten si tienen dificultades con el idioma. Para eso estamos acá. Todo servicio. Así que levanten la mano si quieren pregunten directamente ustedes en inglés. Si no, hacemos la traducción. Ricardo.
I guess that you have a lot of smart partner in the university. So what is the difference between you and your partners when you was a student?
You're asking, is there some partners that in the university?
Yeah, because when you're starting, I suppose that you have a lot of students that are smarter than you, or I don't know, that are brilliant, but
Yeah.
but they're not founder of a company international. What is the difference between you and them?
Yeah, why did I succeed? Are you asking? Or-
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, it's a good question. I think this is probably because I ended up working on a problem that was very a big market. I would say one of the big things is a lot of students ask, there's usually two problems. You either don't have any startup ideas. How many people here have startup ideas? All right, it's about half, I guess. And then the other half don't have startup ideas. So the other half that don't have startup ideas, I think if you start writing down startup ideas every night, you will have startup ideas. It's a brainstorming thing. Or get with friends that have startup ideas and brainstorm on ideas in areas that you think are interesting that are problems. I think for me, I didn't have a startup idea. I was hacking computers, so I was like, oh, this is a fun problem, and then I built some software to automate it and tell you what's wrong with your computer, and I didn't know what to do with it, so I got lucky. I feel like and I think a lot of people that are successful will say luck a lot of times plays into it, because I didn't have this plan to do a startup. I just happened to find a problem that was global, and there was people really needed that solution. So I think, so one of the big things is if you do have startup ideas, what I would encourage you guys to look at is it a problem that is big? Like, look for big markets and big problems. And you can be an okay team and you'll do well in a big problem. You could have, if the problem is small, it doesn't matter how great the team is, then you're only going to solve a really small market. So you really want to look at the market. And so we run into that. That's a big issue. Like, a lot of the students will come up with like a problem, like how to deliver food to my dorm room cheap and fast. And you're like, well, how is that going to turn into a startup? And the challenge there is, there's only so many dorm rooms to build a business out of. And you're like, how is, so ultimately you're like, well, is there a bigger problem than just students in the dorm? But a lot of students pick problems that they know, but you don't want to start too small. You want to find a market that could be bigger, because that is the challenge a lot of times is the problem. And so you want to look at it and go, what are big markets that are growing? And I think like a good example would be AI. Everybody familiar with AI? That's a market that's going to continue to be big and expand. And if you do an AI startup, I think you'll find investors all around the world wanting to fund those startups. I think when you find, like, that's why you don't see, like, restaurants are interesting. That it's a small problem. It's a small market. It's only as big as how many miles away do people go to that restaurant. So it becomes hard to build a $1 billion business with a restaurant. But if you can find problems that are more global, and so I'd also encourage you guys to think about what are problems that can be $1 billion companies. Because if it can, then you have a chance to get there. If you're saying, hey, this is a problem that could be only a couple $1 million, then it's like, is that, because when you start building your business, it's going to be minimally 5 years or more. So you know that over the next 5 years to build your business, you want to work on a problem that can be big, that can be global, and be worth, can it be $1 billion business? And at least then you have a chance to build a successful business. And I think that's probably what differentiated me from all the other students was, most of the other students were they were very smart, but they were just trying to get a job, upon graduation. Me, on the other, I found a big problem and was very fortunate. There was customers, even in Chile, later this week. I'm meeting with some of the early buyers of my product from way back. They're now all investors in Chile, they're looking for great startups. So I'd love to connect you guys together when you have your startup ideas and help you raise money and scale your business.
Thank you, Chris.
Good question.
Ahí. Vamos.
Hi, Chris. My question would be, how did you choose or like discover about Chile? Like, how did you like specifically then go to Concepción, like not the capital city or like the most known, like it's top 3 like universities. So how did you choose it?
Yeah, so I'd say there's a couple areas though, like why Chile in general. I think Chile was probably even like 20 years ago when I first came to Chile. You know, the internet had taken off in Latin America. Chile was very up on it in terms of, I met with a lot of e-commerce, the banks, etc. So I've a history of, I guess, internet enabled, along with, you know, Chile has been very stable economically in general. And I would say one of the key things I'm looking for with startups is engineering mindset. Like the reason my company was successful is I already knew how to build the software and build the solution. I think if you have an idea but you don't know how to build it, it's much tougher to build a startup without that. So one of the things that we're looking for is engineering universities. And when I looked at the ranking of universities in Latin America, University of Concepcion is one of the top engineering schools in South America. And quite Pablo here has some connection to Atlanta. He reached out to me and said, "Hey, I like what you've been doing at Georgia Tech." And I think timing wise, it has worked out in that this year I'm looking to focus on this 100% of my time on how to help build as many startups as possible. Before I was doing lots of other things, and now I'm been working on helping startups for the last 10 years, but now I'm putting all my focus and really looking to scale this beyond just Georgia and Georgia Tech. And I figure, you know, with support and leadership with Pablo, I was like, this makes it half the battle is finding somebody who's a champion inside, whether it's a university or if you have a business, you look for people who are like, hey, this is something that we should be doing. And if we can find that long-term relationship, that's where I saw a great opportunity that this isn't one visit, 1 year, it's a long-term partnership to scale. Because each year, what I've seen happening at like Georgia Tech is each year as you guys build your startups, the next year, the next freshmen and sophomore and juniors are all going to be looking to see like what is being built. And what I've seen is like in manufacturing, it's a tough problem to solve. How do you scale manufacturing? What's interesting is some of those startups have succeeded and now they're giving back. They're like, hey, I'll help the next manufacturing or logistics or warehousing or any number of businesses out there. It becomes a network effect. And I think the more you can get students kind of see that they're not alone, because that's also probably one of the biggest challenges with mental health is, am I alone? Am I the only one facing this problem? You get depressed. You know, there's a lot of anxiety. You look at your phone, everybody else is traveling somewhere, and you're like, why am I working on this problem, right? But if you find other founders, and that's part of the deal, is we want to build out the community here in Chile and the University of Concepcion is how do we build that into the culture of University of Concepcion.
We're really looking forward to that. Thank you.
Gracias. Sí. Ahí.
Sí.
Ahí, Verónica, no, ahí.
Pero él está levantando primero.
Es que yo le dije
¿A quién?
a la alumna ahí.
Ah,
A
pero
ella.
bueno, sí, dice.
Sí. Perdón.
Hi, Chris. I wanted to know if I don't have an idea of a startup, can I be part of a team or something to work into?
Yeah, so one of the biggest problems that I think is out there is how do you get a startup idea and how do you build your team? That's one of the biggest blockers to getting off the ground. One of the things that we're doing is we're putting together like a blueprint for universities to run on a regular basis. And we're also starting to work with student clubs. Is there a student club here for startups?
I don't know.
Yeah.
No.
We have a program.
Okay,
In
if
Cuba-
there
in
is,
Cuba, UdeC, right?
if there is, I recommend join a student club. If there isn't a student club, let's go build one together. And I think within there, the student club is open to people who are interested but may not know or have a startup idea, or they don't know who to co-found the startup with. And we highly recommend you have co-founders, because startups are really, really tough. And a lot of times you want to have 2 or 3 co-founders to help you kind of offset each other's strengths and weaknesses so that you're working as a team. And so one of the key things is, like Jennifer, who was standing a minute ago, she's helping put together kind of a blueprint on how to help universities create these, we call them startup challenges or accelerators, where if you have an idea, or even if you don't have an idea, let's go and brainstorm that idea. And I think it's no different than you coming up with a design project for your class, kind of the same idea, help you brainstorm your ideas and what are interesting opportunities. And usually it's ideas that you're passionate about, like what do you like doing? And is there a way, technology or an app or something, is there something that you could see that would help solve some problems in the area that you're interested in? And so that would be, whether it's an area of study or personal interests, et cetera, I think that's part of it. So.
Thank you.
Ok. ¿Quién venía? Ya, bueno.
Hi, Chris.
There you are.
Un punto. Digan su nombre, chicos, y su carrera.
Hi. Okay, I'm Álvaro Pérez from Industrial Engineering. I have a question. I think everybody here, the students that have great ideas, maybe are afraid of taking that step and maybe spend time, spend money, and maybe everybody here is have a great ideas, but usually we get afraid and don't give that step. So can you give an advice for us to give that step?
Sure. I'd say, I think this is where hopefully our partnership with University of Concepcion will minimize that gap between, hey, I've got an idea. There's a lot of risk in building a startup. I got asked that all the time, is like, weren't you afraid to do a startup? There's all this risk. But as a student founder, I was like, this is the best time. Like, I had no real risk. My risk is I had to stay at Georgia Tech, and within that, I was like, this is like, I think this is why I want to target students, because their risk is actually minimal, in the sense that as you go through your life, you're probably going to get married, have kids, have a house, have cars. Hopefully that's the day, but it also becomes really hard to do a startup. You have all that, because then you're like, now you're really afraid, because if you don't have a job, you don't want to lose all that, right? You don't want to lose your house and wife and kids. So ultimately, if you do it as a student, you don't have that anyway. So very, very best time to do it. So I also just think students have a lot more resource capability. Like, hey, is it okay to sleep on someone's couch? Or, there's a lot of students are open to taking that risk and have the dedication and focus to really put all their focus on a startup. And that's how I was. Like, hey, I'm a little bit of an introvert, so I was okay working on a problem a lot. And I think that helped as a student, coming from a mindset of, this is the biggest risk is, if this fails, I have to go back. And I also think just having the, probably the mindset that this isn't going to be like a blemish on my record, even if it doesn't succeed. I think a lot of employers want that mentality, that you did take that risk, that you were able to do the startup and project management, and there's a lot of stuff you're going to learn that you've been learning in class. You'll be able to actually apply it towards a real company. And I think that opens that risk up. And so hopefully the other thing we've been talking about is like having some funding for the students as well. Because really it's maybe not so much afraid, but as, hey, if I can get a job during the summer, that helps me with my college. I don't want to do a startup and bootstrap and not have any money, and then I can't afford college and my startup didn't succeed. But if we can help fund that, then money helps pay for the summer. So it's one of the things that we're looking at is enabling that as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Klaus. Can I?
No, just one question, Alvaro. Too many questions here, yeah. Just one.
But good question.
Okay.
Hi, Mr. Klaus. It was a truly pleasure to hear you today. I'm going to do that. I'm greetings. Let me introduce myself. I'm Valentin Duarte Chavez, a fourth-year student of Civil Industrial Engineering. And I wanted to know, what is your opinion about resilience as an ability for the entrepreneur? Do you think that it's important to have the capacity to get through failures and keep pursuing the goals, considering every failure as an opportunity to validate data and as a step to success?
Say your question one more time. Just
Sorry.
No.
I'm a little nervous now. What is your opinion about resilience as an ability for the entrepreneur? Do you think that it's important to have the capacity to get through failures and keep pursuing the goals, considering every failure as an opportunity to validate data and as a step to success?
Yeah, so I think you would want to look at the failure as an opportunity. In fact, I'm probably not very popular in the business school because I can tell you almost all of the startups that have succeeded did not have a business plan. I don't know if you go to business school, usually they say, hey, here's a business plan. And they spend months working on a business plan. And then when you go out there to actually apply it, usually it's wrong. And so you're going to have a failure anyway. So normally the best thing is to get out there and start talking to customers and validating what your assumptions are. And I've seen quite a few founders. So I think a lot of founders might have learned from it, and maybe startups aren't for you. And that's okay. But you've tried it, you learned, you can speak about that experience. Some founders really enjoyed, the challenge of building a startup. And we've now seen quite a few founders through this program. They're on their fifth startup, and that they've had some failures, some successes, maybe nothing big, but they enjoy the challenge of going through that process. And I think what you'll find is if you do pursue the path of startups, it's a very, very different culture. And this is probably one of the myths that I've seen a lot of students have is they want to go work for a large company like IBM or a Microsoft, thinking that will help them with their startups. But it actually is an extremely different culture because you've got to wear a lot of hats as a startup. It's actually great for students because you're already wearing lots of hats in every class that you're going to, learning about all the different topics. And then when you do a startup, you're going to learn about marketing, sales, building, support, all the challenges of a startup. You a lot of hats, or a lot of hats. And then when you try to look at a larger company, it's much harder once you're in a large company, because normally when you get hired in a large company, they've already scaled. They already have hundreds or thousands of employees. So you're going to be giving a role that's very specific, and it's day after day the same problem. Versus in a startup, it's almost every day is a new problem. And so it changes your mentality. So if you go down the path of a startup, I think most entrepreneurs that I know, once they do it, they're like, this is the life that I want to build, is continually building new startups. And you see people like Elon Musk, I don't even know how many companies he has started, but he's created a bunch. But ultimately I see a lot of people creating lots of companies after they get into because they know how to do it and they enjoy it and they love that problem. So I would encourage you guys to try it, see if you like it, especially when you're a student, because to me, that's the best time to find out whether you want to pursue that or not. If you don't, that's okay. It's a great thing on your resume. Large companies like that. But ultimately, I would encourage you to try it, because I think every student that has gone through that process later on say, hey, I may explore this later on when I come up with an idea worth pursuing. So it opens up that door for them, so to speak.
Thanks.
Thank you. Vamos ahí. Sí.
Hi, Chris. My name is Aileen Soto. I am a mechanical engineer student. And my question is, which are the main characteristics of the startups that succeed?
Yeah, main characteristics. It's a good question. I think there's probably several factors that we look for. Number one probably is just the team is probably the main thing. Do you want to build a startup? And to what level do you want to build the startup? If you're very interested in startups and you're learning about it and you start reading articles about it, and there's a lot of content around how to do startups. So once you start down that path, I'd say founders that are very excited about doing a startup have a much higher chance than somebody who's not interested in doing startups for obvious reasons. I think also I like teams that have at least one of the co-founders is very technical, that knows the problem to build the solution. Obviously, it'd be like, if you don't have that, it'd be like opening up a restaurant without a cook. You're like, so you really want to have that person who knows how to build the solution. And they don't need to be perfect, but they need to know kind of how to build, whether it's software or hardware or whatever that problem is, how to build a solution. I would say those are your two couple things. And then the market, how big is the market is a big factor. Is it growing? Is it a big problem? Is it just in Chile? Is it throughout Latin America? How big is this problem? If it's global, then that's very exciting, because now you can scale the marketing around the world. Those are some of the biggest factors, I think, and just the desire to build that solution. Ultimately, it's all going to be driven by the customer, and you'll quickly, what they call product market fit. Have you guys heard of product market fit? Some of you guys have. So product market fit just means you have a product, there's a market, is there a fit? If you go out there, and what I usually recommend is like build a landing page, or like try to, what they call MVP, minimal viable product. Don't spend too much time building the perfect solution. Get something out there, and the main goal is to get feedback fast so that you get feedback from customers. Because a lot of times if you spend too much time, you're probably building the wrong product or the wrong features. The faster you get feedback from real customers that say, I want to buy your software, and don't be afraid to sell it to them. Like, hey, do you want to buy this? Or we'll give you a money back guarantee, whatever you have to do to get them to spend money. That's a good validation once they start. And that's one of the things that we're looking for is, did you find 1, 2, 3 customers that will buy your product? Once you have that, that's kind of the genesis of a real business. And ultimately, how do you go from one customer to thousands of customers? But you got to start with the one customer. And I think that usually is one of the biggest differentiators. Like, we have hundreds of startups, but the ones that succeed had to get that one customer. So I think it's a combination of team, market size. Did you solve the one, is anybody willing to be a customer? And then if you get those 3 kind of things pulled together, then you're on the right path. If you don't have the right team or a big market or customers, it's really hard to succeed. So those would be the characteristics of a good startup.
Thank you.
Ok. Tantas preguntas. No recuerdo quién levantó la mano primero. Hagámosla a la matita, ¿no? No. Pero, ¿allá? Ok.
Well, good morning. I'm
And
I'm aerospace. And well, first I want to give you a small context. I'm part of a small student group called like the propulsion student group, or rocket team in essence. And we're driven our passion by making rockets, developing that technology in here. And I have two small questions. First, how feasible, how do you see as a way to collaborate between these kinds of students groups that develop the kind of technology and these kinds of startups? And second, what kind of recommendations do you give to people that pursue in developing these kinds of technologies rather than, for example, services in places like here in Chile or in Concepcion?
yeah, it's a great question, Nicholas. There's I know in the U.S. and I think I don't know how. I know around the world there's now more and more satellites being taken up to space.
Yeah.
I probably would just encourage, like I'm an investor and there's a Phantom Space Corporation, and their whole mission is to make the rockets go into space almost daily is kind of where they want to go, so that the cost to deliver satellites and other components into orbit should go down in cost.
Yeah.
So I guess my thought would be to talk to those corporations that are on the cutting edge of trying to solve that problem. They've already raised hundreds of millions of dollars. I think that's the biggest challenge globally. Is there is some funding, but it'll be interesting to see over time where that whole industry is going. But there is a lot of corporations in that area, and I would encourage you to reach out to those corporations and be happy to connect you guys with some of the founders of those companies, because they actually are doing, they kind of like one of the founders of Phantom, he's like, oh, I'm from Toronto University and trying to get more students to do like the space clubs and so on. And so Georgia Tech also has got its space club, and they're trying to do what they would call deep tech or hard tech, kind of a hardware meets kind of deep science startups. And so definitely would encourage, going down that path. Be happy to connect you with kind of both the student clubs that are doing that, and then also we're now putting together an accelerator specifically for deep tech. And what that means is there's more and more companies, especially smaller startups, but they've had more success raising money, et cetera. They want to help cultivate more in that space. So if there's some interest, there's a startup there's like maybe 3 or 4 startups in Georgia or in Atlanta even. One's called Atomic 6. They're building the materials for like lunar buggies, I guess, like drones on the moon. And so they're building some of the carbon, and my background's not chemistry, so don't get too chemical on me. But but ultimately, I think those would be some of the opportunities to chat with them, brainstorm, find out if there's certain problems that still need to be solved, and then if there is, then go build a startup, and we'll help fund you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. More questions. Aquí, acá, acá y acá. Y ahí comenzamos a cerrar con ustedes 4. 5. Ok.
Hi, Chris. I'm Drazen Jurak. I'm studying industrial engineering. And my question is, let's say I have an idea, but the level of technology that we have in our society isn't enough or don't exist. Should I try to develop that technology, or should I wait and see if there's a market for that, or what should I do?
Yeah, good question. I guess if there's not a technology yet, but you see there's a particular problem space, I guess, probably earliest steps you can take is probably start to build a network of who are the potential customers. Talk to the customers that you, or potential customers you think would want this problem solved. Validate that that's a real problem that they would pay for. That's probably one of the first steps that I would take, is try to find out who would buy it. Would they buy it? It may be too early. If they don't want to buy it because they see it's not a problem today, you may be too early in your space, and that happens all the time where smart people come up with a solution to a problem, but it's, you know, it might be another 5 years before it really takes off. So I would talk to customers to validate it. And usually if it's a tough problem, you can start to reach out. I don't know how, are you guys all on LinkedIn here? Okay, so if you have the problem, start reaching out to everybody. So one of the things I did was, I don't background is not neuroscience, but I wanted to build an accelerator for neuroscience startups. So I hired 2 biomedical engineers and a neurosurgeon, and we built an accelerator. And so the idea there was, let's go find anybody who can spell neuroscience, because probably like Chile, in Atlanta, nobody spells neuroscience. So we got on LinkedIn, we could search, and we found all these neuro researchers. We pulled them together, and we were able to build a network of mentors and hospitals and so on in that space to be able to then do startups. And then we started advertising, hey, we would love to have startups in this area. And then from that, we've actually had quite a few startups in neuroscience, as an example. So whatever problem space you're looking at, you know, if you don't have a particular startup idea yet, maybe you build an accelerator for pulling all the right people together to build that network of both mentors and customers and investors, pull them all together to then be ready to build your startups in that space, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Chris.
Hi, my name is Amanda. I'm in my last year of industrial engineering, and I'm currently CEO and founder of my own startup.
Oh, congrats.
Thank you. My question is that we all know that USA has a more developed innovation ecosystem than the Chilean one or Latin American in general. What do you think are the main characteristics of the differentiation, and what can we do as future engineers or as a country to reach that kind of level of development?
It's a good question. I would think some of the key thing is building those networks across Chile and the US. That's one of the things I'm hoping to help provide, is if you're looking for funding, you know, who to talk to, how to build out those networks. Long term, I believe strongly that success begets success, meaning as you guys build out more startups or your startup becomes successful, I would ask you to give back to your classmates and future generation of students that are also thinking about startups. How do I do this? And I think that's what has driven the success that we're starting to see, is a lot of the founders are asking to come back, talk about their own journey, talk about their own challenges that they face. And what you find is almost everybody resonates with that. Like we're all human, so we all end up with the same kind of dilemma and challenges. So I would just encourage, you know, coming to the US, and be happy to host and connect startups from here to meet with as many investors. And the other thing that, one of the things that Jen and I are looking at doing is building out kind of a community where we can all meet founders from all over the world, probably like twice a year in the US, to say, hey, let's meet with other founders, let's create awareness, and hopefully find out best practices that could be applied to Chile, and as well as make it more advantageous for a lot of investors probably don't invest in Chile only because they don't know how to invest in Chile. And so one of the things will be educating the investors in the US, as well as helping the investors, even in Chile, find startups like yourself. And that's one of the things that I've seen in Georgia. Like a lot of the investors, a lot of that network hasn't been pulled together before. And so we're now starting to connect the dots. There's actually a lot of, there's usually a lot of people that want to help students with their startups, but they don't know how to find those students with the startups, and vice versa. And so one of the goals will be to build that community in Chile to help both on a local level, but also on a global level.
Thank you.
Thank you. So 2 more questions. Okay. Y al final, Manuel.
Hi, my name is Javiera. I'm a third-year student of industrial engineer, and I wanted to ask you is how to, like, when you already have the idea for a startup, how can you build up like a good team? What should I look in people when I'm trying to put together a team that works out?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's 2 phases of building the team. Phase 1 is, can you find co-founders? Have you found any co-founders yet?
Not at the moment.
Yeah. I think that's part of the pitch, is to see if we can help find co-founders with you. And it's something that I think Pablo and the university will have to do, like hackathons or something to help take your idea and help you find a team. I think like do co-founder day, maybe present your idea to other students and see who would want to help you with your startup. You have to evaluate, I would say co-founders, this is a long partnership. So is there chemistry on a personal level? Like, do I get along with that person? Can I work together? That's one level of challenges. I'd probably say that once I've seen some founders have to go solo. They cannot find any founders. So it's nothing against you and nothing against a lot of other founders. Like, do you have a co-founder? Yeah, okay. So if you find someone great, it helps. Obviously you can then teamwork, but if you can't, then it's okay. I would say once you get customers and get some revenue, that's when you can hire your team. And one of the things that I think will be key there is helping provide, one of the things I'm looking at is having an accelerator for team building. Like, how do you build your team? How do you hire? How do you work with recruiters and others to help you kind of identify what are the roles and job descriptions that you need for your business? And so that's usually where a lot of venture capital, if they invest in your company, they can also provide some help there if they're investing in early stage startups. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and the last question. Oh,
Thank you.
okay.
Hello, Chris. I'm Manuel from Industrial Engineering and Computer Science. I think we both have like a very similar approach for solving problem. So in particular, when I was doing my undergrad, I started to study stars. Yeah? And I started, the main project was to identify anomalous stars in order to study the physical emissions or astrophysical processes involved and where are the stars. So that project was awesome. We published a paper on that. It was very cool. And after that, I did a couple of works or projects in the industry, or specifically in the forestry industry, where the solution that I made for stars was very useful for trees, yeah, to identify where things in trees. In parentheses, the forestry industry is one of the biggest industry here in our region. So after that, I did a lot of things, even in natural language processing, trying to identify less less listened people or less representative people in some context. So, well, the thing is, I have more than idea, but I've been always like in the research area. So this idea that has been very useful in a lot of different contexts. I've been feeling that I have to work on that idea because it's something that it's solving a lot of different problems in different areas and has been very useful in different parts. But the question is, how can make or monetize an idea that is more than a prototype, more than an MVP, and something where you trust a lot. So the question is how you can build something around an idea. What are the better forms?
Sure. So this is the opposite issue of not having a problem to focus on is usually the challenge is sounds like you have a solution or you know how to apply a solution to lots of problems. I would probably encourage most of the startups that succeed, I would say pick only one problem and then you have already the solution. It sounds like forestry. You might want to look at what are all the potentials, but then find one vertical or one industry to focus on to build out your startup in that space. Because what you want to do is become like dominant solution in that space. And what you do there is as you get look at all the potential customers, sell to all the potential customers in that vertical. Once you get dominance in that area, then it becomes easier to go to an adjacent market, meaning you can go and solve the next industry that's close to forestry. I think the first step would be to try to figure out which industry you want to really target, and then go to who are their buyers. Like in any large company, there's somebody who's responsible for solving that problem that you have a solution for. If you can find that person, have the conversation going, here's what I can build for you. What are the 2 or 3 features you got to have to buy this as a solution? And then the other thing that I found from a pricing optimization, a lot of times you don't know how to price stuff. You're like, what do I charge for this? Because software is one of those things where there's not like an inherent cost, so it can be pretty cheap. What I usually do is ask 2 questions. One of the questions is, at what price point is this too expensive? And then you could also look at like other business models out there, like what are they charging? But I usually ask like, at what price point is this too expensive? So ask, at what price point is it too cheap? Because there are a lot of people will look out there and they see a solution. If it's too cheap, it actually, it's like, is there value in there, right? And in fact, one of my first customers was an energy company. And when they were looking to have their network scanned for vulnerabilities, for me to run my software took less than an hour and I'd have a report. And so when they were like, hey, make a proposal, and they were getting it from Price Waterhouse, Coopers, and a lot of other big companies, they all put in their offer. I put in mine for $5,000 because I was a college student. I go, $5,000 for 1 hour of work seems pretty good, right? So I offered that. I put it in. I didn't hear from them for like a month or 2. And then finally, Con Edison, the energy company, calls me up and says, hey, we've got good news and bad news. The good news is you've been selected. We love, you came in the cheapest of all the other offers or other proposals, like PwC and others. Probably, I don't even know what they charge. The bad news is your price is too cheap. And I was like, okay, I could probably fix this. So I was like, what's a price point that would be okay? And he goes, my boss won't believe this report is valuable unless it's like $20,000. I was like, okay, great, that's easily fixed. So, and I even threw in that I would fly up to New York City to deliver the report as part of the 20 grand because I was like, this is a really 1 hour pro. So a lot of times you want to ask, like, what price point is it too cheap? What price point is it too expensive? And in the middle somewhere is, and if you talk to like 10 customers and get that data, you can kind of circle where is that optimal price point in the middle. And so I would say figure out your price point, figure out what features you need to do that they would buy, and then you'll have a kind of your requirements of what to build and go get them to buy it. You know, that's the biggest challenge, I think. Once you get people buying your solution, hopefully you have like 5 or 10 customers potential to go and sell it to a bunch of, and now you'll have a real company.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. And now the last question. El micrófono, si lo pueden pasar para atrás, por favor. Y mientras llega el micrófono, un pequeño aviso. Al final, después de la charla, no se vayan, nos vamos a sacar una foto afuera con Chris. Así es que quédense.
Okay. Hi, Chris. My name is Yvonne. I study civil engineering. And I was wondering, you have accomplished a lot of things in your life, a lot of success. And I was wondering if you ever had to deal with mental health and how did you make it to work with discipline? And basically, how did you make it work if you ever had to deal with it?
It's a good question. So I think there was 2 things in my life that were probably had a huge impact on my ability to do the first company. One was coding, just as a language, learning how to program, because that helps you learn how to structure problems. So mentally, if you don't know coding, I'd highly recommend learning coding as a student. I would say almost every student in engineering at Georgia Tech now is taking a minor in coding. So it doesn't help with mental health, but helps you with thinking about problems. I say the other skill set, though, that does help, I learned from my grandmother early on how to meditate. Does anybody here meditate? All right, handful of you guys. So I found for me, meditation is something that you can do in the morning or right before bed. And that was a skill that I did as a kid and still do, is meditate. And I think it helps create a moment of silence for your brain, especially nowadays. I know with my kids, so I have had to deal with mental health, mostly because I have 2 boys and we've gone through some tough times with mental health, depression, et cetera. And the resources I know in Atlanta did not have adequate resources. My guess that's probably true in many cities. There's not really good help there. But I'd say, I'd say meditation, there's apps out there like Calm or Headspace. I don't know if there's any for Spanish speakers. Is there any out there? Anybody recommend any, or you have one? Okay, so medical. Okay, you guys try that one. Yeah. So, but basically, I would highly recommend learning how to meditate, and I think finding others, maybe counselors. I don't know if the university here has ramped up on counselors. I know in Georgia, Georgia Tech, for example, they have more counselors, but it's still not adequate. And I think, I don't know. I tell my kids they need to get off of TikTok and Instagram and all that, because I think that plays a lot into it. So I don't know. I would highly recommend try meditation, talk to others, because the reality is I think all of us probably feel anxiety and lots of pressure. I would say meditation and try to find counselors, and maybe there's some peer groups here that can help you there. It's definitely a big problem that I think as a society, we've got to do a better job supporting people that are depressed and are feeling defeated. And then I've had, I think the US has, I don't know how it is here. Do you guys get a lot of drugs prescribed for depression? Nobody on drugs? Okay, good. I know in the U.S. they were recommending like Adderall and some of these other drugs that help you study, I guess. But I think that can have good for some people. Yeah, I think you have to find out for yourself whether these drugs are beneficial or not. I know for my kids, I don't believe the like Focalin or Adderall, those drugs were not beneficial for them. And I think it caused a lot of panic attacks and stuff. So.
Thank you.
Okay, muchas gracias. So,
Yeah, good question though. I do think, just one last thing on that. I do think as founders, it is recognized that it is, like if you're doing your own startup, one of the biggest things I think that I'm trying to help is building out that community so that founders can talk to other founders, because I promise you'll have in a startup some successes, you're very happy, but there's a lot of failures that happen along the journey all the time. And I feel part of my own benefit is I had a co-founder with me that I could talk to and we could bounce stuff off of. And that clearly was a huge difference versus if I was completely solo and couldn't talk to anybody, then you're isolated, and that just makes any problem much worse. So, and I think that's part of why I recommend having a co-founder. And if you don't have a co-founder, at least have a network of, try to identify like 4 or 5 other founders that you can build a relationship with and talk about the problems you're having. And I think realizing you're not the only one with that problem is the reality. Meaning more people think they're alone in the world, and the reality is we all have the same emotional fears and challenges. So definitely encourage that. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Chris. So, yo voy a hablar en inglés. Un gran aplauso para Chris. So, thank you very much, Chris. We know that you have a busy agenda, so we really appreciate that you're here
One
with
last
us.
thing, I'll just say, if you guys have some additional questions, I saw a lot of hands, etc. I am on LinkedIn. Hit me up, and I'll either myself or Jen will respond and try to get you answers if down the road. And also, Pablo has committed to helping answer any questions after this. So feel free to reach out to myself or Jen or Pablo. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. Ahora saquemos una foto. We're going to take a picture outside, Chris.
Oh,
just
perfect.
in front of the building. Acompáñenos. Muchísimas gracias a todos.